Well, good morning. I'm very proud that at this City Council meeting, we're taking action on a number of very important fronts which represent priority for the residents of the city, including getting more affordable housing built by approving the inclusionary zoning policy, a first for any municipality in the province of Ontario, helping small businesses across the city with an average 15% tax reduction, and helping restaurants and local main streets by bringing back Cafe TO for 2022 and taking steps to make the program permanent in future years. All of these policies represent needed steps forward that will help people who live and work in Toronto, and they're needed now because they are important elements in making sure that Toronto comes back stronger than ever from the COVID-19 pandemic. I know you've heard me say that a lot recently because that is my focus as mayor. As we bring this pandemic to an end, I want to make sure that the city government does everything that it can in partnership with the federal and provincial governments to make sure that Toronto, Canada's economic engine, comes back stronger than ever, that we get people back to work, get businesses to be open and thriving and back on their feet, and that we continue to make sure that this city is a city for all by putting a special focus on affordable housing. Approving the new inclusionary zoning policy will be my first key item at this week's meeting of the City Council. In a nutshell, inclusionary zoning means by law that new developments must include an affordable housing component, where rents or the cost of ownership will be less than our expensive marketplace otherwise offers. Private development industry has been very successful, even through the pandemic. That's good for jobs and for the economy, but the long-term health of the city itself and its economy requires that our development industry should play an increasing role in the supply of affordable housing. I believe so strongly in this policy that I attended the Planning and Housing Committee to make sure that it was approved there to be forwarded on to the City Council, where that discussion will take place today. This new affordable housing zoning policy is the right thing to do, and it is a welcome step forward. We are the first city in Ontario to have inclusionary zoning pursuant to provincial legislation, and I am proud that we're leading the way. This is a policy that we asked for, that staff worked very hard to carefully craft in order to strike the right balance. And with the council vote today, we'll be moving forward to implement it so that we can get more affordable housing built as soon as possible. No one can predict no one can predict the future, so that we are going about this in a responsible way. We do have to be prudent and make sure that this policy strikes the right balance. There is a lot at stake in terms of the supply of housing itself, the supply of affordable housing, and much needed jobs and investment in our city. That is why we will review the policy after 1 year. If we need to calibrate the policy after that period and after that review, we can do so in response to the results of an actual review. Staff have given us a path forward that will get thousands and thousands of new affordable housing units built. I'm confident the vast majority of council will approve taking that path at our meeting today and getting the shovels in the ground on these new affordable housing units. Initial estimates show that inclusionary zoning, along with two other housing initiatives up for approval at this council meeting, will together help create more than 12,000 affordable homes within the next 5 years, all of which will help the city meet the goals of the Housing TO Action Plan. City Council will also vote today on my other key item, moving forward with city government tax relief for small businesses. Small businesses are the backbone of our main streets and our neighborhoods. If they don't come back strong, then our city can't come back strong. We have a plan for eligible small business properties to have a 15% reduction in their property taxes starting in 2022. A mom and pop shop downtown or an avenue in Etobicoke with property assessed at $3 million, for example, and meeting the lot size limit would see an overall $8,500 reduction, while mom and pop shops in Scarborough off an avenue with a property value of $1 million, for example, would see an over $1,800 reduction in its property taxes. This helps the smaller businesses which need it the most and provides meaningful and substantial relief to those businesses without unduly burdening larger commercial property owners. It is the right thing to do now and the exact policy we need to introduce in our city as we look at pandemic recovery and how we can ensure through the city government that small businesses thrive and succeed. The province has pledged to match any small business tax reduction through an equivalent reduction in business education tax. So we are hopeful that small businesses will also get the benefit of that promised provincial reduction. I'm also looking forward to the council vote this week on Cafe TO. Cafe TO has been one of our most successful pandemic relief programs. It has positively impacted our city and many of the hospitality businesses that call Toronto home, together with all the jobs that they represent. We turned parking spaces across the city into much needed patios, which generated desperately needed revenues for hard-hit restaurants. People loved it. It created a different look and feel for our city, something I want to see us keep in future years when the pandemic is hopefully distant memory. Over the last 2 years, the Cafe TO program has grown in success, in participation, and in popularity. It has helped hundreds and hundreds of restaurants stay open, helped them to generate revenue, and to protect jobs through the pandemic. I think the vast majority of council understand the value of the Cafe TO program and the support that it has provided to local businesses. This is a good program for restaurants, for residents, and for neighborhoods. I am committed to making sure that it continues, and I am confident that the council shares that commitment. I welcome the city staff recommendations that will make this program even better for next year. The program itself adds up to around $5 million in support for the restaurant industry and for our Main Street businesses. This includes waiving all application, transfer, and permit fees for Cafe TO installations next year. That by itself is a total of $1.2 million in relief. The report also recommends a new streamlined registration process for Cafe TO in 2022 that will require restaurant operators to apply only once for year-round expanded sidewalk cafes. This is good news for business owners who need certainty around the program so that they can make sound business decisions for the future, because many of them continue to have to dig out from the damage done by the pandemic. This is also good news for residents who enjoyed these patios and cafes and want to see them continue and see a vibrant restaurant industry across the city. Cafe TO will be back in 2022, and the work will be done on a permanent initiative, including analysis of all of the different impacts and effects that the program has had. We've been collecting a lot of information, which will be carefully analyzed in order to help us make the best permanent program we possibly can. So when it comes to housing, when it comes to restaurants, when it comes to small businesses, we are taking concrete action at this council to help. Thousands of new affordable homes will get built thanks to inclusionary zoning. Hundreds of restaurants will have certainty and support next year when it comes to the availability of Cafe TO patios once again. And thousands of small businesses in neighborhoods right across the city will see a 15% property tax reduction on their bill for this next year, 2022. All of this is good news. It will help us to make sure that our city can continue to move forward. These are real ways in which we are working to do everything we can as a city government to make sure that Toronto and all residents and businesses who call our city home can come back stronger than ever. That continues to be my main mission as mayor, to see the pandemic and vaccination campaign through, and that continues to be very important, to ensure that a strong recovery for Toronto includes a continued priority placed on affordability and on opportunity, jobs and investment we need to continue to attract to the city to keep it growing and prospering, and so that we can make sure we have available the programs needed to support some of our more vulnerable residents. On that note, I'll look forward to the council meeting today and look forward as well to answering any questions you might have this morning.
Tory, we will not take questions from the media. As a reminder, it's one question, one follow-up. And when we do call your name, we can unmute you. So first up, it's David Ryder from the Star. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mayor. We have not had a COVID briefing since the numbers of new infections turned around and started to increase. I know you have morning meetings with Dr. Davila and other public health officials. In the absence of her, I'm hoping you can just tell us what you're being told about what's happening with COVID-19 in Toronto right now.
Yes, I don't want to put any words in Dr. Davila's mouth, but we did have one of our regularly scheduled command team meetings this morning. And of course, we analyzed the Toronto specific data and analyzed those as well within the context of some of the remarks we've heard from the science table of the government. And I guess I can only say this. First of all, I welcome, and I think all the members of our command team here in the City of Toronto welcome the transparency and the forthrightness of Dr. Uni in talking about the concern that he has with respect to some of the trends we've seen in the province-wide numbers. I think that's an important kind of transparency to have. It's an important discussion that we should all have, including, led by the medical experts. And I think it's important that those of us in positions of elected office should, focus on that on an ongoing basis. I will say with respect to Toronto in particular, if you look at the numbers that have been registered over the course of the weekend, they haven't changed very much for the worse, and they remain relatively better than they were either earlier this year or a year ago. But it is a source of continued monitoring, because we do see changes to the weather, we do see changes to people's behavior patterns. Dr. Davila indicated this morning, for example, that the mobility monitoring we do mainly through the location of cell phones indicated that people's mobility continues to increase, and they're moving about more than they did before, but not back to pre-pandemic levels. And so as these kinds of things change, and as we continue to adjust through large sporting events, through increased capacity that was brought in for restaurants and for other kinds of venues, we're constantly monitoring these numbers on a daily basis and making sure that we do everything we can, as well as doing the planning that we are doing. And we again heard report on this morning with respect to the 5 to 11-year-old vaccine campaign that lies ahead, with respect to the booster shots, and with respect to our continuing efforts to make sure that people who are not in those groups but are in the rest of the population, what we would call today the eligible population, continue to move the numbers up. And I was gratified to hear this morning that we've reached 84.5% fully vaccinated in the City of Toronto among eligible residents, and that we're just on the threshold of 88% of people who've had their first dose. And so all of this, I guess, from the standpoint of the City of Toronto this morning, and we will have a COVID avail tomorrow, but all of this, I think, indicates that we should stay the course, that we should keep an eye on everything in a very careful way, but that people should also stay the course in their own lives. They should continue to wear masks when they can. They should continue to be mindful of the capacity limits that are in place for private gatherings. They should continue to watch for symptoms of COVID-19, and perhaps most of all, they should continue to make sure that they assist and comfort and reassure fellow residents who have not yet been vaccinated to get vaccinated.
Thank you. The follow-up is, I'm hoping you can expand a little on what you said on CP24 about cannabis shops. You speak to the Premier a lot. Have you had any conversations about this? And what do you think the city should have as far as more control over the number and locations of new shops, or I guess existing shops, if some of them go out of business and there's an opportunity to change the numbers?
I spoke to the Premier at length as recently as Sunday, but it was not something at that stage that I raised with him. Wasn't on our agenda for Sunday. But it is something that I talked about going as far back as 2018. I believe the City of Toronto, people don't necessarily understand that the present rules with respect to the location of cannabis stores are set, in fact, by the province. And I believe the city should have a greater role to play in that, both in the context of the proximity of those kinds of shops to things like schools and community centers, but also in terms of the sort of density of cannabis shops that can exist in a given neighborhood. And I've made those views known as far back as 2018. I continue to believe that it is not in the best interest. It's nothing to do with what's going on inside those stores. It's to do with more just the presence of a concentration of that kind of store with the frosted windows and so on. It doesn't create the kind of healthy neighborhoods that we're trying to create, through measures such as the tax reduction and through, measures such as Show Love TO and Artworks and all the things that are designed to get the main streets going again. Frosted windows are not inviting to street life and vice versa. They're not anything that is going to, create necessarily that sense of vibrancy. So I think that the notion that we should see, now that we have the kind of real life results of the present policy, which has led to some very significant concentration of these shops, we should see what might be in order in terms of having a second look either at the provincial rules, and or if they don't want to change their own rules, perhaps they could give us the latitude to modify those rules as they apply to a big city like Toronto, where, this is, we now have, I think the reality is, more cannabis stores than we do LCBO stores. And I'm not sure one is a relevant measure to the other, but it's just interesting. I think people will not know that that is the case as to the number of these that have come up. I think, we had a challenge in front of us post-pandemic with empty, commercial real estate along some of these main streets, but I'm not sure the solution that is one that's long-term, or that is one that is in the best interest of the sort of overall health of these neighborhoods, is to have every one of those vacant shops occupied by a cannabis store. So I just think that, some greater flexibility and some greater role for us, might be something that's quite appropriate to pause, for a moment and have a look at these rules and see what is in the long-term best interest of these neighborhoods and of all the people who make them up, businesses and residents.
Thank you, Dave. And next up, we have Mark Mcallister. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor. You just took care of one of my questions, so I really only have one other. It's with regard to the inclusionary zoning matter that is being brought up today. You had mentioned the one-year review. Obviously, you've seen and heard a lot of the opposition to the percentages that have come up. I'm just curious, is 1 year enough time, or can we expect a proper review at 1 year in order to make the assessment and make any changes if necessary?
I think that's a very good question, Mark. What I'm saying, I guess, is that I think a one-year review would be one that we will do as quickly as we can because there's so much at stake in terms of the supply of affordable housing, in terms of the jobs and investment that is represented, and so on. And so if at the end of 1 year there's an obvious shortcoming in this policy that we could remedy in order to make sure that we expand the supply of affordable housing as much as possible, then of course that's something that we could do. Let's remember that when we hear criticisms of percentages, I sit in a position where I've heard them on both sides. On the one side, I've heard the housing advocates, if I can call them that, who are people who say that the policy wasn't anywhere near strong enough in terms of the requirements it placed on the development industry. On the other side, I have the development industry who we have to rely on to build the housing, including the affordable housing, saying that it was too stringent. And so I tend to think often when I hear that in my job, I do almost every day, that you're doing too much or too little, that you've landed perhaps in about the right place. But having said all that, I'm very willing, and in fact, it was me that initiated this one-year review on the basis that if there's some things that are obvious after a year, in terms of either the ability to do more or an impact that it's having that's negative on our overall production of affordable housing, then together we can have another look at this and bring it forward for some modification. He only had one because he said I already, so if you had another one.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you, and
Thanks
have
a
a
lot,
good rest of
everybody.
your week.
Thanks.